Hi, everybody. We're going to do a quick run through of the things we went through in class regarding different basic sound adjustments you can make to a sound file. Now, remember, most of these we talked about, do them in the waveform view before you put them in the multi-track view. So what I would do is once you have your audio files that you're going to use for your project, those are the ones that you're going to want to get copies of them. Put those copies in a folder on your desktop, and that's going to be your working folder for your project. Because remember, anytime we're creating something in Audition, we're creating a project file that has the extension .sesx, okay? So here we've got the file that we were working with. This is a podcast file. And so what we're going to want to do is do some basic cleanup on it. One of the things that we talked about was first we can do some noise reduction. And this is to reduce some of the sound artifacts from the room we might be in. And remember, every time you're doing an interview, you want to record about, 10 to 20 seconds of room noise, especially if there's an air conditioner or a fan or some kind of hum. And then we're going to use Audition and the noise reduction tool to get rid of it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We do this in the waveform view, not the multi-track view. I've already opened this file. So I'm going to zoom in. And remember, there's two ways you can zoom in. You can zoom in down here with the different eyeglasses, or I can use the overall project tool to zoom in and see what I'm looking at. If I don't feel like I can see enough of the amplitude or the vertical size of the wave file, you can actually increase that part too, so you can kind of see what you're working with. Beware when you do that, that changes the dimensions over here of the decibel scale. So see, when I changed it, when I zoomed out, there's our -3, versus when I go here, see the -3 is up higher. So it's not actually doing any work or making it louder. It just allows you to see more of the waveform. And remember, we talked about you don't want to overload especially when you start adding sound to the multi-track project. So you want to leave yourself some room to be able to add sound to a multi-layered, multi-track recording. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Let me look at this. So on this particular file, here's something that I might use as room noise because it's one little area. So what I'm going to do is use this for my noise print. And once I have it, there's a couple of ways to do this. One of those is I can control click on a Mac or right click on a PC and get the menu. And in this case, what I'm going to do is capture noise print. So I'm going to do that. Yes, it will be captured as a noise print. Lovely. Now I have my noise print. You can also do it through the effects menu. You can go up to the menu and you can get your choices. This is where our different effects are that we can use. And remember, we're going to deal with normalization. We're going to deal with noise reduction. And then we're also going to do a little bit of EQ. But the first thing we're going to do, let's do our noise reduction process, and we get the pop-up window. Now, we've already captured the noise print, but you can also do it within the plugin itself. You shouldn't need to change any of the settings here. We can use the default setting. It will usually do a pretty good job. We want to make sure that we've highlighted everything in the file. That's going to be Control A or Command A, and that way I highlight the entire file. I'm going to go to my noise reduction. I'm going to go to noise reduction process, apply, and now it's cleaned it up a little bit. And one way you can check is go back to your spot where you had the room noise and notice how it's completely flat now, because that means it's completely silent. So I've got this, and you may want to listen to it to make sure you didn't dull the file too much. Sometimes noise reduction will make things sound muted. Most of the time, this technique using that room noise won't do a lot to the voice itself. It will, 9 times out of 10, it'll make it sound better, okay? So now that I have this, what I'm going to do next, we've cleaned up that piece of the puzzle. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to normalize it. And what we're doing when we're normalizing is we're balancing it out a little bit more between the soft and the loud passages a little bit. And we want to get it to -3 decibels. So that will make this even out a little bit. Now, if we do this for all of our sound clips, it will balance them out a little bit more when we put them into the multi-track project because they will all be normalized to the same level. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, again, now in class, remember, we looked at the whole file. And remember we had this little loud section, which is quite a bit louder than just about everything on the rest of the track. And the reason why we were going to change this is because this part, all of the rest of it, is all voice, not music. And this last part is only music, if we listen to it, right? And it gets really loud. So what we want is we want the voice to be pretty close to that loud music. So what I'm going to do is just highlight the part leading up to the music. And then what I'm going to do is go to my normalize. Now there's two ways to do this. I can do this through the amplitude and go to the normalize processor. And then you'll have to, by default, it'll be here at 100%. Now, what we want to do is we want to think of it in terms of decibels. And if I go to 0, that's going to max it out. And I don't want to do that. I want to do it at the -3 decibels. And I'm going to hit apply. And then it will do what I'm looking for. And you'll see that it expanded some of the file. Now, the other thing, remember, anytime you do something, if you want to undo it, it's Control-Z or Command-Z. And to show you that you can do it another way, which is to go under the Favorites menu. The Favorites menu has all different kinds of standard things you might do. My favorite is Convert to Mono, Normalize, and Fade in and out. Those are the the 4 most common ones that I use on these favorites. You can also add your own favorites if you want, but I don't. I'm just using. So I'm going to normalize this to -3, and you'll see it did the same thing. And I'm good with this, so I can hear that it was a little bit louder, and now I can start adding different elements of this into my multi-track session if I want to. In my multi-track session, Groves Podcast, and then I'm gonna, remember we want it to be 44.1 for the sample rate. So I hit OK. Okay, and now I've got the file, as soon as it's done converting, in my project file. Now remember, in class we also talked about there are things that we can do at this level that we can add different elements where on a track, on this track 1, I can use the effects rack to add different effects to this track if I want to. Keep in mind that's going to be after the fact. So what's going to happen is you won't really fully hear what it sounds like until you mix down the project or export the whole project. And I'm not going to do that at this point, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. Remember our differences between the waveform view and the multi-track view. The multi-track view is where you put everything together. It's non-destructive editing. The waveform view is one, anytime we're doing work on this and we save it, that's going to make permanent changes to the file, which is why I caution you on what you're doing with. Okay, so we've done the noise reduction and we've done the normalization. Now the last piece that we're going to do is we're going to do our last little bit of cleanup, which is going to be EQ. Now, this is one you have to be a little bit careful on. You can do it to the whole file. You can also highlight particular parts that may be problematic, especially when you have one. If you listen to this kind of goes in and out. If I want to do it to the whole file, so maybe for argument's sake, let's say we want to adjust this whole file because the source is pretty similar. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the whole file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my effects and I'm going to go to my EQ. Now, I mentioned in class there are several different types of equalizers. I prefer the parametric equalizer. And what this allows me to do, if I go to this, I can choose the function of vocal enhancer, and it will give me a preset guide here. And what we can do is we can take any of these parts and we can adjust them as we want. Now, by default, it does a pretty good job. And remember what we're looking at here. So we've got the actual gain or the volume, and then we have the frequency that we're dealing with. So if I look at this, here's the 0 point, right? So if I do everything is at 0, that means all parts of the frequency spectrum are the same. And we probably don't want that. We probably want to have some variety in the spectrum depending on all of the sounds. So for our vocals, what we're probably wanting to do is we don't want it to be super bassy. So if we had this extended like this, what this means is I've got a lot of bass, so it's going to make my voice, I mean, it won't lower my voice, but it will add some heft to the bottom end and make my voice sound really, really big. And you want it to sound full, but natural. So bass will allow me some adjustment. Most of us in our speaking voices are going to be in this range. 250 to 1000, right around here, maybe a little bit higher depending on if we have a higher pitched voice. Remember, this is the low end, the bass, the kettle drums kind of thing. This is the higher end of the piccolos and the birds, and then voices tend to be in this range. So if it feels like the voice doesn't have enough like natural sound, we may want to elevate some of these middle parts, and you can move these. So like if I want to extend some here, I can do that. If I want to extend some here, I can do that. And the reason why I like the parametric is instead of choosing each of these discrete individual elements, I'm doing it more as a smooth wave to adjust the sound. So what's going on here is we've got this a little bit more on the low end, and then it cuts off to take out the really, really low bass noise so it doesn't sound boomy. So that's why you have this filter that's kind of cutting that off. And then when we go to the top end, this gives us a little more treble and cleans up and clarifies the sound. So that's why we want a little more top end when we're doing things with this. Now you can play around with these and decide, okay, does this sound a little better or does this? But you can you have to have a point where you're like, okay, I got to save it. It's like editing a script. When you're editing your script, you can edit, and at some time you got to push the button and you got to do the script. And that's kind of the same with your effects. You can constantly be doing this and trying to make it sound infinitesimally better, and you may drive yourself a little crazy doing that. So that's why the default in most cases is going to do the job for us. So we'll just leave it at that. Once I've chosen it, this is what I want. I'm going to hit apply, and there we go. So it's fixed it up. My sound is done. And then if I save this, remember in the waveform view, if you save these, it's going to be destructive editing, which means it will change your original source file. And when you save it, sometimes you'll get a warning. This time it didn't give me a warning because I've saved on this file before. And then in the multi-track view, this is non-destructive editing. Now keep in mind, if I have a project where I have, various files and different things, and I go back to the original file in my project and start editing them and changing them, it will change it automatically in my multi-track project. So these will be different if I'm doing things in here, and that's important to remember. So that's why it's good to do your editing on the main files before you start dumping it into your multi-track project. Okay, so that's kind of the basics, the refresher on cleaning up those sounds. So we're dealing with noise reduction, we're dealing with normalization to balance out the audio, and then the last part is putting some EQ to balance out the difference between the highs and the lows and making it sound as natural and as clear as it can be. So good luck with doing that.